Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the very first inaugural Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas Sappy Hour. I'm very glad to see you all here and know that you can actually hear us, so that's great. I'll repeat myself. This is a little bit weird to do, but my name is Emily Rondel. I'm an Atlas volunteer and I'm helping with some logistics tonight. And I'm joined here by a few of the Atlas staff and main volunteers who are going to be sharing a lot of knowledge, information about the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas with you. But before we got started with that, we just wanted to explain a little bit about what a Sappy Hour is. It may have been confusing to some of you, especially seeing that this is the very first one that's ever happened. So a lot of you may have already understood that Sappy Hour is a little bit of a play on happy hour. So hopefully you're all relaxed at home with a beverage of choice, ready to learn all about the Atlas. And yeah, it's also a nod, of course, to the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas logo bird, which this go around is, of course, the yellow-bellied sapsucker. And so Sappy Hour, just like a happy hour, was something that we thought of as just a way to have some two-way communication between some of the Atlas staff and volunteers and some of the Atlasers. And we came up with a particular format. So here's how we think it will work. And we'd love some comments and suggestions for how to do these in the future as well. Each Sappy Hour is going to have a particular topic. It might be something seasonally important, you know, something to do with some of the special surveys, like for owls or things that happen at certain times of year. Or it might just be something that, you know, we're getting a lot of feedback and questions about, you know, from regional coordinators and Atlasers in general. Or it just might be something that's important to know. So there'll be one kind of particular topic, and one of the Atlas volunteers or staff are going to give a very short presentation on that topic, 10 to 20 minutes maximum. After that, we'll kind of just open up the floor and just take questions from our audience, as it were. So if you are watching and you want to ask a question, not just about the topic that we covered tonight, which is about how the Atlas has changed since the last go round, but anything to do with Atlasing, you can just put it in the comment section of this video. And after the presentation, hopefully we'll get to it with our team of Atlas staff and experts here. So this is probably a pretty good time to introduce those people. And I'm gonna introduce them all one by one. And then if they want, they can kind of come on and say hi, and then we'll go to the next person before we get to our presentation of the evening. I'm gonna start with Mike Burrell, because Mike Burrell is the person who actually put together this evening's presentation. A lot of you probably already know him. If you have had much to do with Ebird in Ontario, you probably already know Mike Burrell. He's probably emailed you at some point. Maybe you've read his book, Places to Bird in Ontario, that he wrote with his brother. But Mike is very heavily involved in the Atlas, and particularly on the Species Committee and on the Volunteer Committee. There's probably more. If so, I'll let him correct me on that. And he's going to be presenting a lot about the technological changes and other things. I'll let him explain a little bit about his presentation later, but in the meantime, Mike, do you want to say hi?
Hey everybody, happy to be here. Really excited for the Atlas.
Awesome. Next, we have another Mike, Mike Cadman. We actually almost called Sappy Hour open mic night because we knew that we'd have at least 2 mics most of the Sappy Hours, but we went in another direction. If you've heard of the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas at all, you're probably familiar with Mike Cadman. He's the Atlas coordinator. He runs pretty much every single aspect of the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. I think he's on every single committee. And I did want to also just point out that it's not just that Mike Cadman runs this version of the Atlas, the 3rd Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. He also coordinated the last one, which happened between 2001 and 2005. And I believe he helped to coordinate the very first one, which happened from 1981 to 1985. So he has over 40 years of Ontario Atlasing experience. So let's see if we can stump him with a question tonight. It would be pretty hard to do. Mike, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hello everybody, and thanks for joining us tonight. Really excited to be working on another Atlas and working with a whole new set of folks and a lot of the people returning. It's very cool that things are just happening. We just had a grackle show up in Guelph, so to me, spring's starting to roll and things are going to get rolling pretty fast now.
Things are getting birdie really quick. Okay, that leaves us to our 3rd person here tonight. If you've been interacting with this version of the Atlas, you have probably at least emailed with Kaelyn Bumelis here. I hope I said your last name right, Kaelyn. You can correct me if so. Oh, good. Kaelyn wears a number of hats. She's, I believe the assistant coordinator for the Atlas. So if you've had, issues getting on the website or registering or getting in touch with your regional coordinator, it's very likely you've already been emailing or talking to Kaelyn, and she's a really invaluable resource. As usual, she's doing a number of things at the same time. So tonight she's actually helping stream the program from Zoom, where we actually all are, to Facebook, but she's available to call on for some questions as well. Kaelyn, you want to say hey real quick if you have time?
Yeah, definitely. I'm really looking forward to this Atlas. This will be my first Atlas. So yeah, and it's been really great interacting with a lot of people who have already reached out. So yeah, looking forward to it.
That's great. Okay, so we'll get started just with the first official part of our Sappy Hour, and I'm just going to leave it to Mike Burrell to introduce the presentation of the evening, and the rest of us will kind of go away for a minute, but we'll see you all soon. And in the meantime, if you have an Atlas question, put it in the comment section of the video, and we'll get to it right afterwards.
All right, thanks, Emily. That was great. Yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and talk for much. I'm just gonna set it up, and I'm gonna turn off my video so you don't have to stare at me while you hear what we have to say in the inaugural Sappy Hour presentation.
All right, so we thought we'd start our first Sappy Hour with a little overview of some of the big changes that have happened between Atlas-2 and Atlas-3. Give you a quick overview of those things, and then after we go through this short little presentation, and hopefully it'll get you thinking more about the Atlas, and maybe you'll have some questions that you want to ask us for more details. So first, we need to think back to Atlas-2. The data collection was 2001 to 2005, and it doesn't sound like that long. It's only about 15 years since data collection ended, but there's been a lot of big changes since then. Just take cell phones, for example. At the start of Atlas-2, less than half of adults in Canada actually had a cell phone. It looked a little smaller than these ones, but they were pretty clunky, and they didn't do a lot of the stuff that our cell phones do now. Smartphones didn't really take off until well after the Atlas was completed, and Google Maps, for instance, was launched in the last year of data collection for Atlas-2. Same thing with digital photography. I'm thinking back to the start of the Atlas, even towards the end. A few people I knew had digital cameras, but most people didn't. It was just starting to take off. And another big technological change that's happened really quickly is handheld GPS units. They were just starting to become mainstream during the last Atlas. The Atlas actually had a program to provide a little bit of money for Atlasers to buy a GPS unit. So a lot of Ontario birders, that's when they got their first GPS unit. And in the intervening 15 years or so, they've become almost obsolete because our phones can do those things. So there's been some pretty big changes, which is pretty exciting because it allows us to do a lot of things that we wouldn't have been able to do this time around. So the first big change is the way that checklists have been changed. So in Atlas-2, you were basically doing a single checklist per square per year. And then this time around, we're doing individual checklists for each location and visit. So looking closely at a Atlas-2 data form, you would have had a single data form like this per square. And you just record each year, you'd record the dates you went, how much time you spent, and then you just basically record which visit you first saw the species on, and what the highest breeding evidence was over the course of the entire year. So good data, but not as much data as we're able to collect this time around. This time around, the data is collected on a checklist basis, where each checklist represents a unique visit to a unique location. So a day of atlasing, you could have multiple checklists created for sort of each place you stop. So it's really exciting because the resolution of data we're going to get this time around is pretty amazing. Now, there's some pretty big implications for year-round atlasing and the checklist approach. And I just want to, before I get more into the detail, I just want to point out that all the stuff that we're talking about is available through the instructions and forms underneath the Tools and Resources tab on the Atlas website. So if you click on Tools and Resources, then Instructions and Forms, you'll come to this page, and the appendices. If you click on the appendices, there's all sorts of very specific, detailed instructions related to different topics. And so in this case, I want to talk about the safe dates or breeding dates, which is Appendix H. So Appendix H sets out information about when different species are going to be showing breeding behavior, what sorts of breeding evidence you might be able to look for. And then we also have attached breeding date charts, which show all of this stuff in a nice, neat chart. So we basically divide the calendar year for each species in each part of the province. We divide it into different types of status that they could be showing. So if it's blank, then it's just the species is absent. If it's that yellow gold color, then it's a migrant or non-breeding species at that time of year. And then there's two shades of blue. So if it's the light blue, then it's part of the breeding season for that species, but it's also a time of year when migrants or non-breeding individuals could be present. And if it's the dark blue, then it's what we call a safe date, which is it's generally safe in those cases to assume that any bird of that species you observe in breeding habitat is a breeding individual. So it's outside of the migration window, basically. So to look at a few examples, the first one up at the top there is Canada goose. And so you can see the first few months of the year are that gold color, and it's got gold in the fall and winter as well. So that's showing us that the species is present year round, but it's not breeding in January, February, March. At the very end of March there, the light blue shows up. That's when the breeders arrive or they begin showing breeding behavior. So things like pairing up and setting up their territories, things like that. The breeding season goes from that late March into basically mid-July. But you can see through April, May, and the first half of June, it's just light blue, which indicates that there's still non-breeders present or migrants present. And Canada goose is a really funny example because they've almost completed their breeding in southern Ontario by the time that the birds that are going north will finally leave. So that's why there's that change to the dark blue, the safe dates, not until sort of the second week of June, which is when the last of the migrants are going to depart. And then it's basically the second or third week of July when the first migrants start to show back up again in the fall. And then shortly after that, the young leave the nesting areas and we're out of the breeding season. So the next example, we've got eastern screech owl. And this is another interesting example because it maintains a territory year round. So the breeding season, it's blue all year round. But in this case, the safe dates run from the start of January till basically mid-July. And that's when the young start dispersing. And then there's sort of non-breeders on the landscape that we have to make sure we're not confusing with those non-breeders if we're recording breeding evidence. So that's why we've got that from mid-July till the end of October. Basically, that's the dispersal period of the young, in which is when you should be a little more careful recording breeding evidence. And then starting around early November, that's about when the young dispersing ceases. So we're back into the safe dates. And the safe dates are listed on the left side for each example. So for screech owl, it's November 1st to July 14th. Now, the last example is a little more typical of most species, especially our warblers and flycatchers and things like that leave the province in the winter. So it's blank for the first few months of the year because they're absent. They arrive late April. The migrants arrive. So late April, we've got gold because that's when migrants are around. They start setting up territories at start of May. That's when it switches over to the light blue, but there's still migrants around. And then sort of the second half of May, that's when the migrants have departed. So the ones that are left should be the local breeders. So we've got safe dates from May 20th to July 14th. And that's when migrants start showing up again, mid-July. So you've got to be careful again. Still breeding season, but you have to be careful. And then starting right at the end of July, that's when the breeding season is basically done. The young start dispersing, and there shouldn't really be any more breeding activity. But there still will be water thrushes around until sort of early October, and then they're absent again. So it's complicated this time around because we're doing atlasing all year, and you'd be looking to record breeding evidence, even though it's not necessarily right in the middle of the breeding season, where in the past you just wouldn't have recorded anything for those sorts of lists. So we as part of that appendix, we also have a section called breeding codes and when to use them. This is a little excerpt. And so there's specific guidance on the specific codes in terms of when to use them in relation to those breeding season charts. So something like the S code, a singing bird, you'd only want to use that code during the safe dates because, a migrant could be singing. It doesn't mean it's a breeder. As you move down the list of breeding codes, you get into things like the territory code, which you could make an exception to use it within the breeding season, but outside of the safe dates, if the adult bird that you're observing is clearly maintaining a distinct territory. And then something like fledged young code, you can use that anytime safely within the breeding season, even outside of the safe dates, as long as it's exhibiting that code. So have a read of those. It'll help you understand when you can use different codes in relation to the breeding season. So the next big change is, of course, that we have an app to help with data collection. You can also enter data on the website. And I'm going to show you a really, really quick demo of using the app. But on the website, we've got more in-depth how-to videos that show a lot more detail than I'm able to show in this real quick version.
All right, so the app is really great. I'm just going to open it up here. It's called Nature Counts because it does actually can be used to collect data for other projects that Nature Counts coordinates. The first time you use the app, you have to enter your username and password. It's the same as what you used to log onto the website, and you'll have to select the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas as your project. Once you're in, you're ready to go. It'll already start your date. It'll already fill in the date and time. In most cases, you're going to select Breeding Bird Atlas as your protocol. And the other great thing about using the app is it already figures out the starting point of your checklist based on the phone's GPS. And you can see in this version, this has tracking enabled, so it's got the record track turned on. So I'm going to start the checklist. And it's going to pull up a list of birds that are likely in my area. And you can start adding numbers. So if you had a few mallards, you can start adding. If you had breeding evidence, you click on the breeding evidence. You can change from grid view to list view. List view is nice, especially when you're starting, because it'll tell you the short definition of what the code is. And it'll also give you these warnings. So certain breeding codes you shouldn't be using, or you should be using with caution. So for instance, the multiple code is grayed out. You can't use it. Some other codes like pair has the green exclamation mark. If you click on it, it tells you what the caution is. And some have a yellow exclamation, which is a higher level of warning because it's an unusual code. But you can see these species-specific warnings built right in. So once you've selected your data, then you can review it. If you want to turn off the track, it shows you all the information, the start time, duration, number of observers. You have to tell it what you were doing, if you were stationary or traveling. If you were traveling, then you'd need to enter the distance. If you have the track running, it'll calculate that for you. And you need to tell it whether it was a complete checklist or not. Hit next. Gives you one last look at the list that you can check, and then you hit submit.
So the app is really handy. We're excited for all sorts of new features that will be able to be added over time, and the app should hopefully just get better and better through the course of the Atlas. All right, so the last big change that I wanted to mention tonight is Ebird and what's the deal with Ebird and the Atlas. Lots of people asking why not just use Ebird, or can you share your Atlas data with Ebird? How does the data flow back and forth? So again, going back to the instructions and forms that are on the website, if you click on appendices, there's an appendix all about Ebird and the Atlas, which will cover more than I'm going to mention right now. As I said, a lot of people wonder why not just use Ebird. We thought about it for a long time, but we felt that using the app and nature counts as our data entry portal just gave us a lot more tools to our disposal. And it's a little better in terms of a stronger emphasis on entering breeding codes. We're able to have built-in quality control checks related to breeding codes, Atlas-specific flags for the provincial and regional breeding statuses. We're able to build in a way to pinpoint records right within a checklist. There's, of course, the built-in square map, and there's lots of exciting other possibilities through the life of the Atlas that we'll hopefully be able to build in.
But as far as linking your Ebird account with your Atlas account, it's pretty straightforward, and once you've got it set up, then you shouldn't have to do much going forward. So to set it up the first time, you need to be logged in to the Atlas. Hover over your username and click on Profile. Then scroll down until you see the spot that says Ebird Exports, and there's a little Ebird Canada symbol. If you haven't set it up, there will be a spot here for you to enter your Ebird username and password. Make sure you go all the way to the bottom once you've done that and click on Save Changes. The only other thing to notice here is there's this automatically push your nature counts data to Ebird after entry. If you have that set as yes, and remember, if you're going to change what it says, you got to click Save Changes at the bottom as well. If you have it set to yes, then every single checklist you enter to the Atlas, whether it's through the app or through the website, it will automatically, as soon as you enter it, go into Ebird. So that's very handy to know. Just be aware of that, because if you have it set that way, then you might end up sending records to Ebird that you don't want there. Things like sensitive nest records or things like that you don't necessarily want everybody to know about. So if you're going to be entering records such as those, it's probably best to have it set to no, and then you can manually send each checklist one at a time pretty easily. So to send a checklist, you'd want to navigate to it in the Atlas. So you click on Explore, then View Data Forms. It will show you a list of your checklists that you've entered into the Atlas. And there's a little Ebird column. So you can see the bottom checklist has that little E, and it's actually a link. I could click on it to go to the Ebird checklist because that one has been shared with Ebird. But this example here, the top one has not yet. So if I wanted to share it with Ebird, I'd click on View, and then I'd click the little Share with Ebird button. And up pops your username and password, and you just click Share with Ebird, and it'll take a little second, and then it's got that little note saying this checklist has been shared with Ebird. There's a link to the checklist. If you go back to your View Data Forms, now it's got the Ebird list. You can go the opposite way as well, going from Ebird into the Atlas. If you want to do that, so you've got an Ebird checklist that you want to get into the Atlas without re-entering all the data, click on Submit Data. On the first screen of data submission, there's a little Import from Ebird button. It'll pop up your Ebird username and password, and there's a spot for the Ebird checklist ID. So you have to go to the checklist, grab the checklist ID. It's in the URL. You can highlight it, right-click, and click Copy, and then right-click and click Paste. It's in there. Click Import from Ebird. It'll take a second or two, sometimes longer. One thing that sometimes happens is the site name won't pop up. If not, then you have to enter something, but it should fill in all of the information straight from your Ebird checklist. Make sure it's all right and click Continue. And you're going to go to the species list,
Here, there may be some records that have been flagged for extra review within the Atlas, so make sure you pay attention to those and add details for the ones you need. Once you head down, click Submit, and there now the checklist is in. And it tells you it's got it linked to your Ebird checklist. If you go View Data Forms, you should now see 3. So those are a few of the big changes between Atlas 2 and Atlas 3. There's lots of other little changes, lots of other big changes too, but those were ones that we thought would be good to highlight at this point, and hope that you've got some questions about those or other things that you'd like us to ask.
Thanks, Mike. That was great. We have, I will say, just while everybody else kind of joins us again, Kaelyn and Mike, we have a lot of people watching. So 220 odd people, which was great. And from all over Ontario, from Temiskaming to Hamilton, it's really great to see. And a ton of questions. So I'm going to start to try and go through them. This first one, I don't know. I'll maybe put it to Mike Cadman first, and then everybody else can weigh in if they want. So this comes from Peter Thoem. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. He's responsible for a square in a pretty well-birded area, so Hamilton, Burlington, and it's going to get a lot of casual input, a lot of Atlasers visiting and just putting in their data that who he didn't necessarily send. He's just curious about the best and easiest way to kind of check on, the status of the square, which species have been kind of confirmed, breeders at a glance, for instance. Like what would be the most efficient way for him to get that information?
Well, great question. I'm probably going to ask Mike Burrell to field that one, just because he's more familiar with the sort of ins and outs of handling the data.
No rest for you,
Yeah,
Mike.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. I might actually quick share my screen again.
Sure.
Let's see here. Okay, you seen that? You seen my browser? Yep. Okay. So on the Atlas website, we've got some really awesome built-in tools. So I'm just gonna sign in here. And so first of all, one way you can check that is anytime you're submitting a list, if you're using the website to do your data entry, there will actually be the highest breeding evidence to date will be listed to the right of the species name for that square. Just as you're doing the data entry, if you're on the website doing data entry, you can see right from there. But you can also go into under resources, Atlas Square resources. You can zoom in on there. You can actually save your favorite squares. So I'm going to zoom into my square where I live, and then there's all these tools available for the square, and one of them is called the Square Summary Sheet. And when you open that up, it takes a second on my internet, a little slow here, but at some point it will load up, and you'll be able to see all that information that you're looking for.
Maybe as we wait. It's come up anyway. All right.
Yeah. So there's the Square Summary Sheet, and you can bookmark look at the URL of it. And some of you are probably on phones, so it's hard to see, but it ends with the square ID. So if you know your square ID number, then you can actually just put it in there and jump from square to square. But it gives you the highest breeding evidence. There's a column for last Atlas to tell you what the highest evidence was in the square last Atlas. Then there's the current highest evidence in this Atlas. There's also a percentage of checklists reporting the species during this Atlas. So there's a lot of information right there. And there's a couple other ways to get that information, but those are your two best.
I think that's pretty good. That's amazing. I didn't know about that, so that's excellent. Okay, another thing that's come up a lot, and I think you're going to be really happy with this, Mike Burrell specifically, because I know you've been working on it. When you were showing the safe date charts, everybody was like, oh, those look so much better than the old safe date charts that I saw that had all the different gray cross-hatching. And so many people were commenting on it that I said that we would explain to everybody all together where they can get the new and improved chart that's a little bit easier to read. Anyone want to tackle where that is? Yeah.
Yes, we were sort of teasing that one a little. It's not up on the website yet. We got to wait for a little bit of translation and things like that, and things never happen instantly, but it should be very soon. If you go on to the appendices, you'll be able to see the link, and if you just keep checking back there, eventually the new one will be up
pretty soon, I bet, right? Yeah, we're pretty much done. Okay, are we ready for the next one? This one this one's about the app, and it's come up a lot in all of our volunteer committee meetings, so I'm sure we can all answer it. Do you need to have phone reception or a phone signal to use the app? Because obviously in a lot of places where people are going to be atlasing, that will not be available. Who wants to tackle that question?
Well, the answer is it's fine to use out of cell phone coverage. And when you return to, because the tracking device uses GPS, that will keep a track for you. It'll store your information. And then when you get back into cell coverage, you'll be able to link up and submit the data at that point.
That's perfect. There's a few other kind of fiddly questions about very specific features of the app. I will say it makes me think that maybe another, Sappy Hour topic could be like a really deep dive into some lesser known app features. But I'm gonna kind of, excuse me to those who asked those excellent questions. I'm gonna get to a few kind of more general questions maybe for the time being, and hopefully we'll have enough time to circle back. Okay, here's a great general question from Linda Burr, who asks, when you're using nature counts, I mean, either the app or the website, I think, is it just like a regular checklist? Are you reporting all birds you see, or should you really only include those that you can include breeding evidence, active breeding evidence codes for? What's kind of the best practice there?
Yeah, it's like Ebird in that you should record every bird that you see. At least record the number of every bird that you see, and then every one that you've got breeding evidence for, make sure you include the breeding evidence.
Yeah.
And so you might have lots of birds this time of year, you might have lots of birds on there that have no breeding evidence whatsoever. But in June, almost everything's going to have breeding evidence with it.
Mm-hmm. And, when we do, and when we're working this stuff out with the app, I think it is also really important, like Mike kind of alluded to it in his presentation, there's a lot to come with a lot of these platforms, and they're being kind of worked on and tweaked even as they're being used. So I think the app will be like a really good topic for the future, just because it is changing all the time and there's always going to be so many new features to share. But in general, the best practice is going to be for atlasing to record everything. Here's an interesting one also about the website and app. Can you so if say you have one particular checklist that you want to exempt from transfer to Ebird, you just want to keep it in the Atlas for various reasons. I can imagine, maybe it's a rarity or it's an easily disturbed bird and you don't want it pushed to Ebird. Is there an easy way to just kind of hold that particular checklist back? That's a question from Michael Werner.
Yeah, not this.
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit.
Oh, how's that?
Yeah, I think you're better now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So not at this point. It might be a feature we build into the app later on, but the best thing would be if you're using the app and you start a checklist and then realize, oh, I don't want this one to go to Ebird. The best thing would be to save the checklist, but not submit it. You don't have to submit it. You can save it as a draft, and then either on your phone, you can go into your nature counts profile there and toggle that little option off, or wait till you're back home and do it on a computer. And then once you've changed it, then you can submit it then. So you could stockpile all those particular checklists you don't want going to Ebird. And then of course, the other option would be you can let it go to Ebird and then just quick go into your Ebird account and delete it. That's another option.
Yeah, pluses and minuses to all of them for sure. So yeah, this is a bit of a simple question. It'll be really easy to answer, which is great. People are curious about exactly where you get the app. I guess, if you could share what the name of it is, and also if it's available, like what platforms it's available on in terms of app stores and things like that.
Go ahead, Mike. Kaelyn, you do it.
Yeah, go for it, Kaelyn.
Yeah, you can get the Nature Counts app on the Google Play Store and on the Apple App Store, either one, and it's just Nature Counts, all as one word.
And keep updating it if you do, because there will be changes ongoing, which is great.
Look for the Canada J.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Emily, I just should say, as new versions of the app come out, we will have new videos on the website that sort of try and keep up to date with all the innovations as they're available.
That's a really good point. Yeah, we're not gonna leave anybody kind of in the dark. One other question, and again, this won't just apply to the app, but to both, is just about uploading supplemental data, so audio and photo and video with your Atlas checklists. Is that possible right now? Will it be in the future? And what's the best way to do it? Who wants to answer that one? Mike Burrell, I'll hand that one back to you because I know you've been working on it.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, adding like media files. So yeah, audio or photos. We don't have that quite yet. The plan is for it to get added to the website fairly soon. If you're doing data entry on the website, you'll even notice there's a little grayed out media box that's already there. So it's like we've already built the spot where we're going to put the button. So it's very soon, hopefully. I'm not sure. We're not sure yet if it'll make it into the app for this year. But so it's gonna most likely, at least for this, gonna end up being the way Ebird. You have photo or audio, you gotta go onto the website to add it, but it's not even on their website yet, but should be very soon.
Just in time for when breeding season really gets going.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. Okay, this next one is for Mike Cadman because it speaks to kind of the last Atlas as well. So with all of these changes, there's going to be probably a lot more coverage in well-populated areas in the Atlas and a lot more data submitted. Are the coverage goals different from Atlas-2 or have they stayed consistent?
Well, the coverage goals are generally the same in that we always had sort of minimum goals that we were looking for. So we were looking for 20 hours of coverage in each square. And even though in last Atlas in Southern Ontario, we got over 50 hours in an average square, we still left it at 20 hours as the minimum sort of acceptable for a square in Southern Ontario, or really any square in the province. So from that point of view, those goals are the same. One thing that's changed this time is the point count coverage. We're still looking for 25 points in squares that are targeted, but this time we're looking to get more of the squares done. We aimed for sort of 100% of the squares in sort of the Golden Horseshoe area, 50% in the rest of the area south of the Shield, and then 25% on the southern part of the Shield. This time, we are looking to try and get as close as we can get to 100% of the squares with 25 point counts right up to the Sudbury-Temagami area. North of there, still have the same kind of goals at this point because it's hard to gauge how extensive the coverage is going to be in the north. So same kind of goals as last time. About 5% of the squares in the southern part of the boreal, and then only about 2% of the squares in the remote part of the boreal. That's for the sort of volunteer work. At the same time, though, in the far north, we are doing an awful lot of work this time with these autonomous recording units. We're going to have hundreds of autonomous recording units collecting loads of data in between and complementing the work of the volunteers right across the north. So the volunteer goals are pretty much the same, with the addition of getting quite a few more point counts in Southern Ontario, but we will be getting quite a bit more data from other sources as well.
And just for those who, aren't that familiar with kind of ornithological methods, Mike, do you want to just explain to some people watching about those units and kind of what they are and what they do? Yeah,
they're certainly a new thing, and they're going to be used heavily in the north. Some people I know are familiar with them, and starting to own them now. But they're devices that you can strap onto a tree, say, and you can program it for when you want it to record. And they've got batteries on them that will last for months. And so a lot of the things that we're doing, and the Wildlife Service is going to be using them a lot, is to put them out in the late winter when we can get good access to areas with helicopters and such, and then program them right through the breeding season to do essentially 5-minute point counts at intervals during the morning, collect some in the evenings for get crepuscular species, and then do some nocturnal stuff as well. And then come back in the fall, pick them up, download all that information. And then we're actually going to be looking for volunteers to listen to those recordings and pull things off. I think the nocturnal stuff you can actually program. You can program it to look for some of the owls and some of the simpler nightjars, the nighthawk and that kind of thing. There are recognizers that can do that for you. But for most of the birds, you have to have somebody listen to them. So our hope is we're going to be setting something up so that you can be sitting in the comfort of your living room in January, listening essentially to point counts from the Hudson Bay lowlands and filling in data forms at that point.
Well, you already have a few volunteers in the comments, as well as people wanting to know where to buy them, and we can link some data there. They are kind of expensive, but you can certainly buy one of your own if you're interested. I use them for golden winged warbler work in Southern Ontario, and my big challenge was finding them again after they've been out for a little while.
Yeah.
So hopefully we don't lose too many.
Yeah. Well, hey, Emily, maybe I'll mention there are two kinds. Well, probably multiple kinds. I'm not expert on these things, but there are small handheld devices too. And we've actually purchased a bunch of these, distributing them next week out to regional coordinators. So all regional coordinators will have a couple of these. And they're going to be, this is how we're going to get the point counts done in areas where we don't have enough people who can do point counts themselves, is volunteers who can't do a point count can go out to a point count location with this device, record for 5 minutes, give us the information as to where they are and when they are. And then again, that information gets downloaded and somebody else can be interpreting that at a time that's convenient. So we're hoping very much, I expect it's going to be up in Central Ontario in particular, but that a lot of people will be doing that kind of thing who may not be able to do point counts themselves.
Yeah, that's great. It's a good way for somebody who's just kind of learning the ropes to get some practice out in the field, but then also be able to collect some data and contribute to the Atlas. So that's great. Okay, let me look. There's so many questions, everybody. It is just, and some of them have already been answered. Oh, okay, here's a really good one. This is one about the app, and I've had some trouble with this, so I'm curious. Somebody's curious to know if they can, once they know that the app is really good for submitting Atlas data, and then you can kind of see the things that you've submitted on the website. Is it just as easy to kind of go through your old checklists and modify them on the app itself? I know that's something that I haven't been able to do just yet. Kaelyn or Mike Burrell, one of you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so right now the app, it's, Emily mentioned earlier, there's still lots of stuff happening with the app. It's only going to get a bit better through the course of the Atlas. So at this point, it's just for data submission. There's no way to, once you've submitted, it's like that checklist is gone. If you want to edit it, you can go onto your phone and log into the, with your web browser on your phone and edit it that way, but not through the app yet. And we've got other things prioritized. That's a nice thing to be able to do, but we really want to add like the track log in and make sure all the really, really important stuff is working first, and then we can move on to those sort of nice to have features.
That's good. So yeah, you can still do it on the website though. That's the good news. You can look over your data there. Here's a good one. And Mike Cadman, you've already kind of like alluded to the answer to this question with what you were talking about with, beginners taking out handheld recording units and whatnot. But Josh Roth here asks, he wants to go out and count. Is it still okay if you submit a checklist, even if that checklist doesn't, you didn't recognize every single bird in the list by sound, for instance, like you're not able to have a completely complete checklist. And he's also curious about how much of an expert you need to be in order to do point counts. And maybe you can also just speak to how people get assigned point counts and how the regional coordinators are going to work that part of the Atlas out.
Well, there are about 6 questions in there.
Sorry.
Where do I start? Okay. Can you give me a one at a time there?
Yes.
The logical
Okay.
order to this.
Yeah, sorry, Josh had a lot of questions. Okay, so I'll start with this one. So if you're doing a count and you're submitting data, to the Atlas app, but say there's something that you don't recognize, it's not a complete checklist. Is that still okay to submit, or are they complete lists only?
No, it's fine to send in a list. The question is, are you submitting, like in Ebird, are you submitting a checklist of everything that you could identify? Our hope is, of course, that you'll be able to identify most of the birds, and if you're new, that you'll be working on your skills, and so over time, especially being a 5-year project, by the time we're done, hopefully your skills will be up there and you'll be getting a much higher percentage. But yeah, it is okay to do the best you can. And the main thing is just to be careful to avoid misidentifications, right? Just to stick with the ones that you really know. That's the most important thing in that particular regard.
That's a really good answer to that. And then the second thing is he was curious just about point counts. He wants to know how you get assigned to do them, who gets to do them, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, well, point counts, you really have to know your birds quite well. I'd say, yeah, essentially, if you should know almost all the birds in the area, certainly all the songbirds in the area, you should know by their song before you can be doing point counts. Again, if you haven't found Dendroica and some of the other sources, have a look at Dendroica and work on that. With that system that I mentioned, it's called Wild Tracks, that we're working with the Wild Tracks folks to enable us to listen to recorded data. We are hoping to set some things up where you can sort of test yourself on this. You can get some recordings of birds from the Hudson Bay Lowlands. You can go and listen to that and work out for yourself whether you could do point counts in the Hudson Bay Lowlands. And we'll have similar lists for parts of Southern Ontario. You can go on, listen to it, and give yourself a very realistic view of what it's like to do a point count and assess for yourself whether you're ready.
That sounds good. And Kaelyn, can you speak to, I know, you've been populating the Atlas website with like a lot, a lot of resources, and some of them about this. You have a whole link of or a page of links and places to resources where you can learn your songs better. Is that right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go under the tools and resources, or even just from the home page, there's a learning resources page on the website. It links to Dendroica from there and some other free resources that are available, and then goes through some of the paid resources like Larkwire, which is a phone app for learning your bird songs. And so, yeah, the learning resources page on the website will go through kind of everything from free to the paid resources as well.
Yeah, definitely check out the Atlas website. There's a lot on there, everybody, and there's more being added all the time. And I think there's just a ton of resources, and not all of them are kind of generated for and by the Atlas. It's just kind of in terms of ornithology, bird research, and conservation in general. So that's good. Okay, there's a lot of questions that are all kind of getting at, where are people able to Atlas? Can you Atlas anywhere you want? If you happen to be on a vacation somewhere in Ontario in the breeding season, can you just Atlas from wherever you like? I know the answer, but I'm gonna leave that one to Mike Cadman, I think, as well, because I know we've talked about it.
I want this one. Yeah, no, not only can you, but you should Atlas wherever you go and whenever you are. Yeah, absolutely. Certainly very much encouraged to submit data anywhere you go. And when you're on vacation, you're probably in areas that are getting less coverage than around developed areas and cities. And so, yeah, certainly always every opportunity you can get, we're hoping people will submit data.
That's great. Okay, we're getting kind of to the end of our time, so we're just going to ask a couple of questions. One thing that we have been getting asked about just a lot in general, because it's kind of the elephant in the room everywhere, is, birding and atlasing during COVID. So yeah, I don't know. Kaelyn, do you want to start us off with that, just to kind of explain what some of the what's the Atlas recommending people do in general?
Yeah, certainly. Obviously, this year for data collection is a little bit of a sticky situation just because of COVID-19. And so we want to be careful and be following our regional and provincial guidelines. So we do have some guidance in atlasing during COVID-19 on the website. It mainly just says, follow your regional and provincial guidelines, and whichever is kind of the stricter of the two, be sure to kind of adhere to that just to be on the safe side. I'm not sure if Mike Cadman, you want to say more to that or add anything to it?
No, generally that's certainly the main message that we're sending out there. Be extra careful and be sure that you're following the guidelines in your area. I should mention one thing you may not have heard much about on the Atlas to this point is the work in the far north, which is one of the most exciting parts of the Atlas. But we decided because of COVID-19 that we didn't want to be have any likelihood of taking COVID up into the remote Indigenous communities up there. So we have decided we're not going to do any atlasing in the far north in 2021, and hope things are cleared up for 2022, and we can start to concentrate on getting that area done as well.
Yeah, and I mean, things are changing so much, so often with COVID, but yeah, keep checking the Atlas website as well to kind of see what the Atlas position is as things continue to evolve constantly. And I think the Atlas staff and volunteers will try and keep everybody updated as well. So that's great. Okay, let's see. We're definitely not going to get to all of these tonight, but one thing I will say, I just want a couple of minutes to point people who are listening tonight, all 200 of you still, thanks for staying the whole time, everybody, by the way, just to a couple of the Atlas resources. And before that, actually, even, I think that it would be great if, thank you for commenting with your questions, but if you also want to kind of comment on the video here below and, recommend some topics for future Sappy Hours, things that you really think that we should cover, things that you really want to know about. Those are things that we kind of keep in mind as we plan these in the future. And also, if you've had any recommendations or opinions on how often, you want to see these happen and things like that. This is something that we're trying out for the first time tonight, and we'll take the community recommendations on board as we plan more of them into the future. I also want to point out that the Atlas is on social media, and you can follow along with all sorts of developments with the Atlas through social media. Now, you are on Facebook Live right now. You're watching a Facebook video, so I'm sure that you know that the Atlas is on Facebook, but just in case you don't have a Facebook account and you want to join, you just look for Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas on Facebook. But the Atlas is also on Twitter and also on Instagram. And in both of those locations, it's the handle @on Breeding Bird Atlas, all one word. And lastly, you can watch this video recording if you want to go back over it again and again, as I'm sure you will. You can see it on Facebook where the recording will be. But if you don't have Facebook and you just kind of tuned in from a link today, this will also be shared to our YouTube channel, the Atlas YouTube channel. And you can search on YouTube for it as Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas -3, and you'll see Atlas videos. I will say, I went on YouTube and just searched for Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas already, and a lot of different groups have already posted YouTube videos. A lot of them are Mike Cadman's talks at various naturalist clubs about the new Atlas. So you can see a lot of content, but the actual Atlas account and channel is Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas -3. Anything else that any of our other panel members or Atlas staff volunteers want to say before we sign off?
Yeah, I wanted to say, maybe ask Kaelyn to say something about the new service that we're about to launch for people who have questions.
Yeah, definitely. I just kind of finalized this today, so it's hot off the press, I guess you could say. We're starting a discussion forum that will be on the website where different people can ask their questions, and Atlasers can either respond or will respond to your questions as well. And so I think that would be a really great resource to get at a lot of these questions too.
Thanks for that.
And I had one more. And that is that Mike, Burrell, and Emily and Kaelyn are all regional coordinators as well. And they're 72 people involved in being regional coordinators in our 47 regions, and they're a fantastic source of information, and would really encourage you to take your questions to them and get to know your local coordinator and work with them to try and help make sure your area gets the best coverage possible.
Keep us honest so that as regional coordinators, we keep up to date with everything. That's good advice.
And if we're wrapping it up, I just wanted to say, Emily, thanks for emceeing or hosting. You did a great job.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for everybody for joining us, 200 of you. And yeah, we'll see you at the very next Sappy Hour. Hope you enjoyed your beverage. Hope you relaxed, learned some tips about the Atlas. And yeah, we'll see you next time, hopefully. So have a great night. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.